Sitting on the other side of 3 main Star Wars episodes that should have used the budgetary might of Disney to elevate the franchise to new creative heights, well, it ended up being a bizarrely improvised mess of potential and squandered execution. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot to love. The casting of Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and Oscar Isaac was beyond perfect, and The Force Awakens served its purpose in knitting back together a prequel-scarred cross-generational demographic looking for something to champion as one. In retrospect though, and especially in light of seeing just where all those chess pieces fell, there are a lot of categorical, embarrassing misfires that will dog this sequel trilogy forever. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and this is Star Wars Sequel Trilogy, 11 missed opportunities we'll never get over. Number 11, not one shot of the original cast together. This remains a criminally wasted amount of potential, and something that would have blown the roof off the cinema had it gone down. Seeing the iconic trio of Luke, Han, and Leia, Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher respectively, back together. Mark Hamill has been more than vocal about this, saying it was a huge shock realizing that killing Han meant Luke could never see his best friend again, before adding, "Holy cow, that's a real missed opportunity." To be fair, it is. Disney straight up missed their window to unite some of the most iconic characters and actors in cinema history, and besides the story side of things making it hard to do unless through flashback going forward, the tragic passing of Carrie Fisher makes filming any new scenes impossible. In the end, we watched Han die too early, then cut away from Luke's reaction to that news, which never gets mentioned again. Leia gets a meaningful death thematically, but it's rendered weightless thanks to flat filmmaking. And Lando gets resigned to minutes of screen time, leaving Chewie, R2, and 3PO to tag along until the end credits. Number 10, a good question for another time that never comes. Something indicative of 2 major problems with the new trilogy: J.J. Abrams' love of the mystery box, and the lack of a through-line plan for the trilogy itself. I'll get onto what happened with that supposed blueprint in good time, but one massive thing set up pretty blatantly in Force Awakens is how Maz Kanata came into possession of Luke's lightsaber. She very clearly states that it's a good story but for another time, and yet it never comes. In fact, Maz is then resigned to a webcam chime-in during Last Jedi, then randomly gives Chewie his A New Hope delayed medal at the close of Rise of Skywalker. Both latter scenes feel tacked on and pointless, as the character was clearly set up to be something greater. Oscar-winning Lupita Nyong'o was cast as Maz's voice and even facial movements, so why get such a tour de force if you're going to give her a role that doesn't go anywhere? Number 9, everything about Captain Phasma. I say everything because not a lick of Captain Phasma's placement in the trilogy makes any sense. First up, there's casting Gwendolyn Christie, a shoo-in for one of the brightest stars working in Hollywood and an Oscar winner in waiting, if ever there was one. Christie's role as Brienne of Tarth in Game of Thrones helped define the earlier seasons of that show as exemplary, and her turn as a chrome-plated stormtrooper should have been easy to execute. Once again though, a complete lack of planning ruined everything. Twice in a row, Phasma is unceremoniously cut out of her own films. In The Force Awakens, she's the butt of a trash compactor callback gag from A New Hope, to which we never see her again. Then it's revealed a more memorable close to her character was filmed and edited for The Last Jedi, but it was replaced with a quicker death instead. The deleted scene is much better than what we got. Number 8, the First Order's inconsistent scale. During Force Awakens, it's hammered home that the First Order are an extremist fringe group, hollowing out a planet away from the rest of the galaxy to create a giant superweapon, then managing to fire it. Hux' speech about the last day of the Republic comes across as unhinged, and the takeaway is that Rey and the gang will have to mount the offensive to stop this antagonistic force gaining any steam. Then The Last Jedi begins, and the opening crawl states that the First Order reigns. But do they? Multiple planets were destroyed, but without insight into what systems or hierarchies were housed there, and not knowing the First Order's numbers outside that one Hux scene, it's impossible to know how much damage was done or could be done. After all, we're only a few days after the events of the first film when things pick back up. Thus, we have to buy this out of nowhere hiding on a planet faction are suddenly as big as the Empire, rendering Luke and the old squad's efforts meaningless, as if this is the case then the actions of all those characters did nothing. A much better way to go would have been stopping the First Order from getting off the ground, with the potential of another empire forever being a threat. Instead, their capabilities vary wildly depending on who's behind each movie's script, and they fail as a meaningful set of villains. Number 7, no unique visual identity. Think about the visual ephemera of each Star Wars trilogy. The originals are dusty and grimy, stormtrooper armor is occasionally scuffed, and our heroes are covered in tattered robes, wielding rusted blasters and driving clattering ships that barely get the job done. Cloud City was a notable example of high society versus the luscious greens and sweltering jungles of Endor. The prequels are something altogether more futuristic and synthetic, a populace with a lot to lose. Opulent, skyscraping feats of engineering and art decor, the array of aesthetics from the underwater Gungan city to Kamino, Theed to Mustafar are all outstanding from a sheer visual perspective. Star Wars video games would have a field day mining this stuff across the 2000s, and 2017's Battlefront 2 added a ton of prequel content, only reinforcing how Lucasfilm's art department was a shining star across that period in the saga. The sequel trilogy then, well, Jakku is another Tatooine-style desert planet, which gets repeated again by Pasaana in Rise of Skywalker. Takodana is another jungle planet with literal second scene of what the rest of civilization is up to while our heroes are doing their thing. Ironically, The Last Jedi's Canto Bight is one of the only extended looks into the wider Star Wars world during all three films, and even that is a tucked away snapshot versus anything trilogy defining. The newer movies simply don't have a defined visual identity that meaningfully differentiates them from what went before. Number 6. Finn's Wasted Arc. I could call this Finn's wasted everything when focusing on Rise of Skywalker's portion of his story, but it stands to reason that between JJ and Ryan, they didn't have a clue what to do with Finn beyond what if a stormtrooper had feelings. Because despite Finn fronting all the marketing materials for The Force Awakens, even doing battle with Kylo in a number of trailers, Johnson denied his sacrifice to wound the First Order in The Last Jedi, and Rise then reduces him to man who yells while being thirsty for Rey. Yes, Finn meets up with some ex-troopers in the form of Janna and various extras, but besides one scene where we find this out, there's no sense of belonging, no questioning of what he's supposed to be doing after a life of servitude, and nowhere for him to go. Playing into the child soldier angle and giving him a meaningful rivalry with Phasma would have worked. Having Janna and her crew defect because they heard about him being the first person to do so would have worked too. Instead, John Boyega, like pretty much everyone else, is ultimately wasted. Number 5. Almost everything about Luke Skywalker. For the record, the idea of a Jedi becoming disenfranchised with their own legend and believing they'll do more harm than good by leading followers astray is fascinating territory. It just didn't belong in a middle installment of an unplanned trilogy that should have otherwise been building or maintaining momentum. Because looking back across all three flicks, JJ and Ryan's treatment of Luke Skywalker and Mark Hamill is just awkward. After Hamill got majorly back in shape to reprise the role, he was told of only being in The Force Awakens for a few seconds. Mark then hated everything Johnson had planned for the middle installment, stating he fundamentally disagreed with the portrayal, labeling it not my Luke Skywalker, seeing the character toss his lightsaber over his shoulder and attempt to murder a child in their sleep. Rise of Skywalker tried to make amends by having Luke outright state his actions in the previous movie were wrong, before smiling to camera and lifting his X-Wing out the water like a Make-A-Wish celebrity coming round your house. It's such an obvious attempt at course correction, such naked fan service and hand-throwing "okay, we're sorry, we yield" that taken sequentially across the films is jarring as hell. Add to this that other than sparring with Leia in a flashback, Luke doesn't get to fight anyone with a lightsaber in 3 Star Wars movies. Number 4. Snoke, Palpatine, and the lack of a decent villain. Another JJ mystery box was whatever the hell Snoke was supposed to be. Voiced by the legendary Andy Serkis and appearing as a giant teleported-in figure, Snoke was clearly this new trilogy's main bad guy, the person we'd learn about across each film and someone who backed up the First Order's overblown nature with calm, calculated horror. Then he got cut in half by Rian Johnson and all involved had to figure something out as a replacement. Eventually they landed on Palpatine, but him being the master string puller in the final film does very little to establish a sense of continuity or threat in the other movies, especially in hindsight. Palpatine is not mentioned whatsoever across anything from the films to the comics or even Force Awakens or Last Jedi's visual dictionaries, making him every bit as forced on screen as the script felt in real life. The originals had the presence of Grand Moff Tarkin, the unleashed power of Darth Vader, and the cackling menace of the Emperor. The prequels gave us Darth Maul's incredible visual design and the coolest spin-off lightsaber of them all. Count Dooku was Christopher freaking Lee, and Anakin's descent was at least engaging. Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and Rise of Skywalker, they allude to a villain, dodge his motivations, kill him, then resurrect a character we watched die in 1983, who gets the combined screen time of about 10 minutes. Number 3. Forcing John Williams to be a nostalgia machine. Outside the incredible creature designs and art department in general, John Williams might be the one takeaway element of every single main Star Wars film that has been truly exemplary. Episodes 4 to 6 gave us the Imperial March, Luke, Han, and Leia's themes, Binary Sunset, and so many lifetime-defining pieces of music. The prequels might have skimped on the script, but we still got an entire movie's worth of expertly crafted compositions, Anakin's theme, the mighty Duel of the Fates, and tons of pieces that have brought endless amounts of additional media to life. For the new movies, well, honestly, I adore Rey's theme, and thankfully Williams knocks it out the park with that piece of music in Rise of Skywalker, but that's about it. There's something so annoyingly safe about the directions Williams was given in these new movies. At every turn it seems that he was told to recreate something from the past, to lean into what went before and to forego meaningful new territory. Honestly, can you even think of Finn's theme or pose? Is there any scene in the new movies made better by a unique piece of John Williams' music that isn't from an older film? Williams was notably subdued across these newer flicks, and it will only continue to hurt them in retrospect. Number 2, wasting a phenomenal new cast. It cannot be overstated how much of a miracle getting this new cast so spot on truly was. They had so much to live up to, so much to be compared to, and yet Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and Oscar Isaac as Rey, Finn, and Poe were lovable right out the gate. Sadly, looking back, things are notably pear-shaped. Daisy Ridley is an incredible talent, an immediate solid screen presence with infectious charm that can sell emotional swerves in a heartbeat. Sadly, the culmination of her character never really comes. Acting-wise, it's probably the showdown against Kylo at the close of Last Jedi, but character-wise, there's no payoff to what would be decades of agonizing over her own purpose and the idea of the Force, Luke Skywalker actually existing and her role at the center of everything. John Boyega gets it worse, as I've mentioned earlier, and Oscar Isaac, a seasoned vet of the big screen but still a dynamic talent and easy leading man, gets resigned to a flyboy or scoundrel type in The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker after only appearing in a handful of scenes in Force Awakens. Point being that although these guys were amazing in group interviews and away from the films, on screen their group dynamic is non-existent, because they only function as a unit in the final film and it's all way too rushed overall. To squander not only your returning actors but all the new ones too, Disney, that's one hell of a feat. And number 1, failing to justify your existence. What it will always come down to: money. Disney purchased Lucasfilm from George Lucas while he was creating his version of Episode 7. George's plan was to sell Lucasfilm after that movie was completed, but after Disney made an offer, everything changed. Lucas reportedly left his ideas with Disney and became more of a consultant, with Disney then discarding everything, wiping out scores of extended universe novels, and even ditching an in-progress script from Michael Arndt, replacing it with J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan's. The resultant time crunch meant everything was played super safe, and the Episode 7 we got apparently came with some rough outlines for Episodes 8 and 9, but they too were discarded when Rian Johnson came along. Disney never had an MCU Kevin Feige type individual to oversee everything. If the 3-film plan did exist in some form, it certainly wasn't adhered to when Johnson was then allowed to write and direct the second installment, something that backfired even more when JJ returned. Across this whole process, the movies have been rushed to make money as fast as possible on a 2-year cycle, with interstitial flicks like Rogue One and Solo filling the gaps. Honestly, there was no reason they couldn't have delayed Episode 9 just to try and get it right. In the end, Disney's Star Wars sure did make a stupid amount of cash, but looking back, can you honestly say it justified a whole new set of core episodes? At least that's what I'm thinking a good chunk of time distance from the end of the newest trilogy. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you soon.